In today's world, the intersection of sports and music plays a integral role in our line of thinking and how we approach society at large. It informs our decision making and helps us to form a philosophy which helps us to win at all aspects of our life. No matter your socioeconomic background, sports and music has a unique way of bonding all of us closer together. No one knows that better than Andy Frye. He's a sports writer whose articles have been published in the likes of Forbes, the Rolling Stone, and ESPN. He's interviewed scores of athletes from Shaquille O'Neal, Venus Williams, and Tony Hawk, just to name a few. He's also had the great fortune of interviewing some of the biggest names in music, including the Smashing Pumpkins. He's also written a book entitled 90 Days in the 90s. It's a plot-driven fiction title, travel story, which encompasses music, pop culture, and contemporary history. Fry joined me this week to have a conversation about the intersection of sports, music, and the 90s, and how it's influenced his life. So without further delay, I'm Kevin McShann. Let's have this conversation. Andy, if you're ready, I'll take a moment to welcome you to the program. And I'm super excited to learn about your work in both the intersection of sports and music. Great to see you this afternoon. And thank you so very much for being here.
All right, go ahead. Great, thank you.
Yeah, so Andy, I know that you spent most of your career writing in sports, and you also have had quite the extensive background in music. So I'm wondering if we can start our conversation by you simply giving me a 360-degree view of your life and what makes you so fabulous, my friend.
Well, I don't know about fabulous, but I guess you could say I've had, for someone who has interest in cool things, I've had a nice ride. Yeah, I like anybody else. I spent some time, working the day job, and it's probably about 15 years ago. I started just writing. I've always been a writer, but I started blogging about sports, and got to eventually take that to become like a job, which was kind of strange because I worked in business for a long time and started dabbling as a writer on a blog, and would just write about sports primarily and give my opinion and ask friends what they thought about probably like beg my friends to read my posts. But eventually it became a thing where I got to write a little bit for ESPN and then write more for ESPN. And originally it was high school athletes and extreme sports athletes. And then the last couple of years, it's been major athletes like Shaq and Tom Brady. And I just interviewed Tony Hawk for the second time last week, legends like Billie Jean King and Venus Williams. And it's been kind of all over the place. So it's been a good ride. And I'm just a sports fan who asks people questions about what motivates them and what else they're doing, when they're not swinging a racket or throwing a football. And from that, just have kept writing all along and come up with other projects since.
Absolutely, and Andy, as an old sports reporter myself, I'm fascinated to ask you about how do you think the intersection of sports and music really collide together, because there are similarities between the two. So I'm curious to get your thoughts on the intersection of sports and music and how you think they collide together.
Well, I think for the people who love music and people who love sports, I suppose there are a lot of segments in the population that just kind of know about sports. They know who Michael Jordan is, and there's people who just listen to whatever's on the radio. But both attract people who make them obsessions, or pretty close to obsessions. We got, it's everything. I've known baseball nuts who can tell me, off the top of their head what I don't know, Babe Ruth's on base percentage was as a hitter. I know people who know everything and I haven't really kept up with NFL football as much as some of my friends. Like, I remember when the 4-3 defense was the big thing in the 80s, and I still grumble about the circumstances under which some people can score touchdowns, because I think it was a lot harder in the 80s when I was growing up. But my dog just walked in here, so he heard us talking. But there's people who, in every sport and every subgenre of music, or every genre of music too, same with movies and TV, like there's people who don't do it professionally but are experts because they love it. And I think the cool part about entertainment in America and in the Western world is that we can really dial into something that just makes us happy and have in-depth conversations, or just observe and enjoy it, I guess, more passively. So I guess with music and sports, for me, they intersect. I live in Chicago, so I mean, Chicago always was this great music city, and now for several years we've had Lollapalooza, we've had Riot Fest, we've always had great little clubs where I can see a band with 100 other people that may be big someday, or maybe just is a band that I enjoy. And I think sports is the same way too. I mean, obviously you got to go to an arena to see Chicago Bulls. You go to Wrigley to see the Cubs, but there's all kinds of great stuff. Like I remember years ago going up to Northwestern to watch the collegiate fencing championships. So I took my kid, who was 3 at the time, now he's 16, and we were just fascinated with like the competition, and I guess the physical commitment that that someone who swings swords has. I think sports and music, there's something for everyone, and the great part is that we can really get obsessed and really enjoy everything that's there if we want to.
Yeah, absolutely. And Andy, I know that you're the author of 90 Days in the 90s, my friend. So tell me about the book, why you wanted to write it, and the message behind it as well.
Yeah, I think everybody, even people who aren't writers necessarily, like we all have a good idea for a book that we thought of at one point or another, or so either it's a memoir about something happened in our life, or like a funny skit, or we think about like the crazy stuff that happens in our office and our school and our home and who knows what. So I think when I was just starting to get into sports writing, I was just trying to do whatever I could to get articles published, and to get, maybe get people to read my stuff, and just get onto the next interesting topic. And all along it, I thought about a number of different ideas for books, but I think this one, 90 Days in the 90s, I just had a little over 5 years ago, but going on 6 years ago now, I just had an idea. I was walking around one day around Easter, just kind of taking a break from working on my computer, was listening to some music on, through my headphones on Spotify on my phone. And I think I was listening to 90s music. I don't even remember what exactly I was listening to, but I remember just having a thought, like, wouldn't it be great if I could go back and see this band, or if I could go back to the 90s, and especially 90s Chicago, because I was a 20-something in Chicago when the whole grunge and indie scene was happening. I just thought, like, would it be great to go back in time? Or we think about time travel a lot in terms of like Back to the Future and all these movies where somebody's got to do some big thing. But if you and I could just time travel for a weekend, like we would probably go do something fun. We wouldn't go necessarily try to go kill Hitler or save JFK from getting assassinated or do something majorly in terms of world events. Like we would probably just go back to like our high school, or I don't know, maybe a sandwich shop or a taco place that we love that's closed now, or we'd go see a band. And that was really just the thought behind it. Like, just like I'm a sports fan who writes about sports and gets to interview athletes, like I thought about going back in time, traveling to the 1990s in Chicago and kind of experiencing the music scene. And then once I thought that was a cool idea, I just took some time to invent characters and figure out like what would be a realistic situation for a real person who was in that scenario, who, got to go back in time and got to do some things over, like we all think about things that we like to do over. And that's really where the idea, grew. It just was kind of this organic thing. And when I was about halfway through the process, like 2.5 years ago, I had created a story that I was still working on, but it was basically this, I had characters that were hanging out in the 1990s, listening to cool music from the 90s. And that every day that I would write, I was kind of like going back into, I would basically like go hang out with my friends in the 90s. And that was me writing the story. So 2 hours would go by and I'd be either editing something or writing something new or coming up with an idea. I wanted to see if I could work into the story, but it was really like I was just going out and hanging out with my characters there and having fun for a couple hours a day, and it made it easier. I think you got to write what you like and what you like to write about. So that's sort of what I did, and I just made it more of an experiential thing. And with a little bit of work and elbow grease, it became a book when I finally finished it.
Well, Andy, I always say when you find your passion in life, you don't work a day in your life, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think whether if your passion is knitting or fishing or I don't know, like I'll give you an example. The first writing conference I ever went to was the Northern Colorado Writing Conference. I think I went back in probably about this time of the year in 2017. I had a friend in Colorado to visit. The conference was only like $200. I just went for days. And also there were like literary agents and people, there's like stuff to do that was important as a new writer thinking about writing a book. But it was me, from Chicago, and people were asking me like, why are you here? And I was surrounded by a bunch of people writing dog memoirs or dog books. A lot of people writing, there's like at least 10 or 12 people writing memoirs about caring for someone with Alzheimer's, which I didn't know that subgenre of nonfiction was that big. And then there's plenty, it's Colorado, so there's plenty of outdoorsy types writing about, like zombie apocalypse in the woods while skiing or hiking or whatever. So, but just like the number of dog memoir people, like I have a dog now. I didn't have a dog then, but my dog is sitting here next to me as we speak. I kind of get now why, if you like dogs or you love your dog, you might want to write either, I don't know, a kid's book about dogs or a nonfiction book about like, I don't know, whatever. There's a million different ways you could take it. So the fact that you just love dogs or you love your dog, that there's a whole bunch of opportunities if you want to write. And that's kind of how I look at it, that, anything can be a passion or something that's fun. And, writing a book is just sort of putting in the work to have a conversation with people out there who might be interested in what you're interested in talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. And, as a sports reporter, and I'm curious to get your thoughts on the process of actually writing a book and sort of the perspectives from your life and professional experience that made writing the book a little bit easier as well.
Yeah, well, so I've done. I guess unless you're doing just play-by-play, I think I've interviewed a lot of athletes. So I think interviewing, you're always looking to get quotes if you're talking about sports because there's always somebody who helped win the game or the championship, and it's always great to get a quote. So when you interview people or you make conversation with people, that's a great skill to have is when you're trying to write a book. And I didn't know that. So to give you an example, like how that came about halfway through the process, I decided that my protagonist, Darby, the name was the same, but I changed Darby from like a white guy like me to a woman. And there's a couple reasons behind that. I think in 2020, I thought, I was having some success getting agents interested, but I kept getting like pushback. And I had this realization that maybe in 2020, after 4.5 years of Donald Trump and Me Too and George Floyd, that maybe the last thing that people want to read about, or the last thing publishers are interested in, is a book about a white guy who wants to go back to the past. So I had that realization. I thought about some things. I thought, well, maybe the character can be the same person, but would be more interesting as a female. And I thought about the fact that I've interviewed half of the athletes I've interviewed. So I mentioned I've interviewed Tom Brady and Shaq and Tony Hawk, but I've interviewed just as many women. I've interviewed like Jenny Finch, Billie Jean King, about maybe a third of the U.S. women's national soccer team, Megan Rapinoe a couple times, Venus Williams twice. So I wasn't going to say that as a writer writing a fiction book that I suddenly knew everything about women. But as a narrator, because my book is in third person, I just kind of used that interviewing that I did with female athletes and everybody that I've interviewed, because a lot of times we forget about the fact that like sports writing, a lot of it's like you're talking about somebody else's experience, their game, their season, and you're trying to relate it in 800 to 1,000 words. You're basically, retelling someone's story, and that's what you do as an expository writer in sports journalism. So I had to kind of take that and scale it up a little bit, and that's the muscle that I use to tell the story of this woman who is, around about my age. She's a Gen Xer. She goes back to the 90s, in her 20s, to experience some things over, and she's just into as much into music as I am. But not trying to be here, just trying to retell her story. So I think just the interviewing that I've done over the last, like 10 plus years helped in being a third person narrator trying to write a book and take accounts and episodes from that person's life and then putting it on a page and making it make sense. So yeah, that's pretty much the main thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And Andy, I know you've written for both Forbes, ESPN, and the Rolling Stone. The Rolling Stones. You've interviewed, as you said, Shaq, and I know you've also interviewed the Smashing Pumpkin as well. So I'm wondering your thoughts on your defining moment as a journalist and your favorite interview as well.
I mean, there's probably 20 of those. Yeah, I mean, so one thing that happened with COVID is Zoom is normal now. So before COVID, in the year-long lockdown, like most of the interviews I did were over the phone. Like literally, I would have a recording device next to my cell phone. It would be on a telephone. But Zoom became normalized. So then the second time I got to interview Shaq, I'm doing a Zoom with Shaq like I'm doing with you. That was kind of trippy because first of all, like he's super down to earth and he's nice and he'll talk to anybody like a normal person, which I think is a great asset to him. Even though I rooted against Shaq when he was playing because I grew up a Sixers fan and I was a Bulls fan in Chicago, so I never rooted for Shaq as a player. But like getting to do a Zoom with that guy, like I would do with my aunt or you or just any normal person, that was pretty cool. And we talked a lot about some the things that he was doing, but also like as an athlete who owns a bunch of businesses, because I wanted to know like how different are you in your pizza restaurant than you are on the bench or on the court. And he actually told me a story about like one of my pizza restaurants, we had a flood. Like I closed the pizza. He owns some Papa John's, so it's like a takeout pizza restaurant. So he's like, we closed, like we weren't open, but everybody got paid. And we had to do things like call the plumber and drain the water out of the place and move some equipment around and figure some things out to really get it so he could open the next day. This is, I think, one of his pizza stores in Atlanta. So we don't tend to think of like multi-million-dollar athletes doing nuts and bolts down to earth things like that. But the ones who are involved in business, who have their own brands or have their own, like they partner with people to do things that they're not experts on, they have to deal with real people, so to speak. So that was cool to hear from him, that he's inspired by some of the same business like visionaries that we are, and he reads and he's always wants to learn more. And I think a lot of us aspire to that. So it's cool to see someone who's a mega sports celebrity who everybody in the world knows, have a conversation about those normal things that we experience in the office or in our workplace.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm fascinated to ask you this because it's kind of a personal question of interest. So, Andy, I was born with what's called spastic quadriplegia cerebral palsy. It's the most severe form of cerebral palsy that you can be born with. And I'm always looking to help people diversify their way in getting into journalism. So I'm curious, how do you think we can get more diverse voices in journalism itself, and particularly folks with disabilities as well? What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, so I mean, I think the cool part is, so yeah, when I was growing up in the '80s, I would turn on TV and I would see Brent Musburger and I would see, like, I love Dick Schaap, and there usually would be like one woman, usually pretty blonde, one who also knew about sports on CBS Sports or ABC. This is before ESPN came about, and I think we're in a much more diverse territory. So I feel like I mean, there's always criticism of sports journalism, but um, it's more diverse. So I'll give you, so last summer, totally random. I don't know if you've ever seen the commercials for um, the Shriners and their spokesperson, Alec Kabakungan. I met him at Oak Park. It was like Oak Park Street Fest or Oak Park Mayfest or something last summer. And I was just like, hey, like, how's it going? You know, I want to tell my friends I met you. We bumped fists and stuff. And then we connected on Twitter. We've had some conversations. And I was delighted to find out that Alec, you know, like, he still gets around in a wheelchair. He still has the same physical difficulties that he's had his whole life. He's a journalism student at Northwestern, and every once in a while I'll check in with him. I'm like, hey, how's journalism? And he's like, it's kicking my ass. Like, I'm taking a ton of classes and I'm trying to keep up here. And I just say, yeah, that's just like, you know, I guess that's the way it is, and keep it up and you'll do fine. Like, he is a sports mega fan more than I. Like, he's probably met more um, professional athletes than I have. And he's always into, like, that's his dream to do that. So how that unfolds, I don't know, but I think there's better representation, you know, across the racial spectrum, I guess, and people from all walks of life. I see a lot of Black and Hispanic women do, like, local sports reporting for NBC and ABC and Fox in Chicago here. But yeah, I mean, I think that there's an opportunity for anybody who's really motivated to do sports journalism. You know, there's different types of it now, and we're in a gig economy. So whether you're a freelance sports writer or an editor, or you're on screen, you know, in front of the camera, I think there's more opportunities to do more things. So yeah, I don't know how it unfolds, but it seems like there's a lot of people out there who are motivated to do cool things, as I was. And I think it's just, you got to go after what you want in life, and wherever we can encourage people that we know who are trying to get into the business or get into media, I think, you know, we should definitely do that.
Yeah, Andy, I'm a Canadian, so I'm gonna quote Wayne Gretzky. You miss 100% of the shots you don't take, right?
Yeah. Yep. He took a lot of them. I mean, he scored a lot, so I'm wondering how many times he missed, because that must have been a hell of a lot too.
Well, absolutely, and people don't know you're out there unless you put yourself out there, right?
Mhm.
Absolutely. And Andy, I know you have a deep love and respect for pop culture and how it affects our life today. So when you look at the world today, I'm curious, how do you think the intersections of music, sports, and pop culture really intersect to influence the decisions we make and the things that we get into as a society?
Well, you know, so I've never really listened. Like, I can't name a song by Selena Gomez. I've seen her in a ton of movies now. Like, I know she's in, maybe not a ton of movies. She's at least a dozen movies, and I've seen like 3 or 4 of them. And then she's in this series that my wife watched called Only Murders in the Building, where it's 3 different, very different type of people who are all hooked on true crime podcasts, which is like a real thing now. And then they're all kind of, I guess someone dies in their building and they want to figure it out, and they do their own podcast. I think she's fabulous. You know, if she pulled up here in Chicago and said, you know, had a concert at Soldier Field, I'm not sure that I'm going to go see her play, because I'm not really into her music, but I appreciate her acting. And, you know, who knows? That's not to say that she couldn't drop a single with, you know, Drake or you know, Bad Bunny or somebody. I don't know. I mean, I feel like there's all kinds of cool thing about the gig economy is that we're all doing different things. I mean, I used to be in IT and I was in sales, dabbling on the side in sports writing, and now that's one of my main gigs. It kind of goes hand in hand with the fact that, like, Ice Cube started a sports league, you know, Big Three basketball. He wasn't happy just being a Lakers fan and watching the Lakers win when they win championships. Basketball enough that he wanted to get into it and, you know, found this whole new thing, and he didn't stop music doing it. So I don't know. There's probably at least we want to sit around and talk about. There's probably we come up with 3 dozen celebrities off our head who are doing music, doing TV, doing something with sports, doing business. I just saw that Dale Earnhardt Jr., the race car driver, he's retired from driving mostly. He does weekend basically play-by-play for NASCAR. He's doing something with soccer with Charlotte FC. I didn't think that the guy was a soccer fan at all, but at least he's a soccer investor and he's a soccer fan now because he wanted to help be part of the group that brought Major League Soccer to South or North Carolina, where he's from and he lives. So I don't know. I feel like pop culture is rife for cross pollination, I guess is a term I would use. And I mean, sometimes there's collaborations I want to roll my eyes at, but I think that there's more often than not being connected digitally and being online and on social media and the internet. Just it stokes us on a bad day to be kind of vain and need attention, but the good byproduct is that there's so much creativity that comes out of more people now that I think didn't exist in the analog world that I was born into in the 1970s. So yeah, lots of cool stuff going on around there, out there that we can check into.
Yeah, absolutely. And Andy, I've got a two-part question for you, and I'm curious for you, what's the best part about being you? And I am a child of the 90s myself. I'm 34 now, so I grew up in the 90s. So I'm curious to get your thoughts on the best part of the 90s as a decade, in your opinion, as well.
Well, it kind of goes back to the last. I mean, different momentum, but same thing. Like we just talked about, creativity that comes out of everybody being digitally connected now. I think, and I'm biased maybe because I that was when I was first. The 90s was when I was moved out of the house and was first allowed to do what I wanted to do without the purview of my living in my parents' household. So the world felt like it was wide open to me. But I do feel like musically, 90s. For as much as we hear about Nirvana and grunge, there was all kinds of different music that became mainstream and to put it another way, acceptable. That I would turn on the radio and I would hear, not just pop music, baby, baby, baby. It was, songs from the grunge and indie scene that were about, being sad or recovering from something bad that happened in your life, or I think there's a band from Milwaukee called Citizen King that was like a happy-go-lucky sort of funky reggae influenced band that also wrote about having a bad day. So I feel like there's so much creativity that came out of the 90s. Women in folk were doing their thing with the Lilith tour. Punk came back, metal came back. I mean, hell, Motley Crue had a top 10 album in 1997, which showed you that people were still interested in kind of the glammy side of metal. It's like you could be who you wanted to be musically and creatively in the 90s, and it was more acceptable, and there was just so much more creativity happening, I guess, versus the 80s, where in the 80s everything was, very polished, very glamorous. You wouldn't wear ripped jeans if you were a band that expected to be on stage at a big venue. So, yeah, I think just the creativity and variety in the 90s is probably the best thing about it. And what I'll say is, so you're 34, I'm 51. I've got a 16-year-old who's going to be 17 in the summer. He plays guitar. And I find from him and his friends that they're interested in all kinds of music, too. And it could be that, we Gen Xers are their parents, so we influence their music. But I think the cool part about the digital world is it allows people who are curious to check out all kinds of different things. So, you could be a kid who's, your friends at school listen to Drake and Selena Gomez, but, one day you hear a Stevie Wonder song from the 60s or the 70s and you go check, you'd spend an hour on Spotify or Apple Tunes or, whatever it's called these days, listening to his music to see if you like it, not just that you have to go to a record store and buy something before you decide you like it. I think younger kids, the Gen Zs, have a better variety in the repertoire with the music that they like because more is accessible. They're allowed to be curious, but also I think that there's a genuine curiosity that other generations had to see, like, oh, I like this band, maybe I could find out, or I like this singer, who else sounds like them, and what else is out there. And that's a really interesting dynamic about the 90s that kind of has worked its way into today. I don't know if that means the 90s are back or just that we have some of the same ethos and motivation and curiosity that we had in the 90s. That's probably more what it is.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I know you also have a background as a disc jockey, so I'm curious how that helps you as a sports reporter and writer to relate with athletes and musicians alike.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't DJ'd since I was in college. I have a little bit of a podcast that is mostly just some of my interviews that I've done. I don't really spend a lot of time on podcasting, but so yeah, it's just I think more it's just my interest. I do ask, like, a lot of times with athletes, if I know that they're interested in music, especially like in baseball, I will say, like, how'd you pick your walk-up song? Because they have a song that usually gets played as they walk up to the plate. There's a couple times where I've said, like, so what kind of music motivates you? What do you play air guitar to when you're home alone and nobody's making fun of you? So I grew up an Eagles fan in Philadelphia, and after the Eagles won the Super Bowl, I got to interview Chris Long, who's like, he's Howie Long's son. He's I guess he's a lineman. I forget what his exact position, but I knew he was really into country, even though he didn't grow up in like Texas. And we were talking about country music. I asked him if he ever heard of Nikki Lane, and he's like, "Oh, let me write this down. What does she sound like?" And I said, "Well, she's like, she's probably in her late 20s. She's in the new Nashville scene, but she sounds like a rock and roll Loretta Lynn," which, he's like, "Okay, well, I got to check her out." I didn't really have a lot in common with the guy. I mean, the guy's a pro football player. I'm 5'7", and I am pretty athletic, but I definitely couldn't hang with someone throwing a football and guys tackling each other. But we connected on music. And I do this, like, I connect with people on food too. If I know someone's into barbecue, I've heard they're into barbecue, just like you heard that I was a DJ. I'm probably asked them, like, "So what do you barbecue in your bed?" You're like, "I hear you're a barbecue person." Like, "What do you do? What's your favorite thing?" I think the best thing to do with when you're interviewing is just keep it conversational, be real with people. I never liked the sports reporters who stuck a microphone in someone's face like Jim Gray does and tries to get the scoop. I love Dick Schaap. If you probably don't know who he is, but if you look up Dick Schaap on the internet, he's probably been deceased for about 20 years, but he was always super conversational with people, just like he could have a conversation with anybody, no matter how big of a superstar they were in sports or whatever. And just like, shoot the breeze with them and talk about food and kids and music and who knows what. I think that goes a long way, and you get more out of your conversations with people when you just are having a conversation with them versus trying to pick their brain for the scoop or the facts or, I don't know, some inside thing. I think people don't warm up to you being nosy. They warm up to you being a human being and just talking with them.
Yeah, and I always tell myself it's important not to be in a robot syndrome, right? To always try to humanize yourself, because then you get more out of people. Would you agree with that?
Yeah. So it's interesting. Like, so I've interviewed a few athletes with disabilities. I interviewed a blind Paralympic sprinter, last summer before Tokyo. And this guy's name was David. And I didn't really know much about him, other than he had won some things. And I basically, I said, so tell me what are you expecting for Tokyo? And he wasn't at all like, it's hard being a blind sprinter. I got to look like, he was like, I'm there to win gold. Like, I'm there to dominate, that's how I do it. And he was had no less bravado than you would expect of like Charles Barkley or Michael Jordan or anybody that you've heard of that's more famous than him. That was great because like he's got, I think I talked to him over FaceTime or Zoom, and he had like a mask that he was wearing over his eyes. Like, it looked like a sleeping mask to me, but he's, just standing outside, kind of getting ready to warm up and telling me like he's there to win gold medals. That was really cool to hear. I mean, as a sports reporter, that's the kind of thing you want to hear. You want to hear the bravado. You want to hear like, yeah, we're going to go out there and dominate and kick butt. You don't want to hear, oh, my ankle hurts today. I'm not sure how that's going to go. So that was really cool. I just had a lot of great experiences, and I don't know, I just tried to focus on that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm curious to ask you about the role you think athletes play today and sort of their social responsibility to contribute to societal issues that affect all of us. What sort of responsibility do you think athletes and musicians play really in controlling the narrative or influencing our opinions today?
Well, I mean, I think we're in a dicier place because politically, I think the country, I mean, the USA is a little bit more divided, and with social media, you are quick to get tagged with something that maybe you're not. If you say something, not even if you say the wrong thing, you say, if I complain about the litter on my street and that crime's a problem, I might be tagged as like, oh, you don't care about social issues as well. I think athletes are probably better, not trained, but conditioned to sort of just be mindful what they say. I think just like business leaders or teachers or anybody who's in the public eye, like they should be themselves and they should focus on their craft and also just focus on being good human beings. When I was growing up, the best pitcher who played for my hometown team, the Phillies, was Steve Carlton. And Steve Carlton would not talk to the press. Like, I don't think you can get away with that now. You'd probably get fined X $1,000 per game. But he would pitch, he'd kill it, he'd come off the mound at the end of the game. Actually, like at the end of the inning, he would go directly to where the kids were, sign their baseballs, and he wouldn't even talk to the press. And he's a Hall of Famer. Like he's a Hall of Fame left-handed pitcher who was just amazing at what he did, won a couple of World Series. Not everybody can be like that, and not everybody can be wanting to be famous and quoted every second of the day. I think people just got to be themselves and focus on being good people. And if you are motivated to talk about something bigger, like I know some of the women of the U.S. national soccer team are really, the equal pay is a big thing because they've gone through issues with that with U.S. soccer. I know that Julie Ertz is really big on like making noise about human trafficking and how women are treated. I think that's important if that's important to you, and if you have an issue that is important to you, you should definitely do something extra. But at the same time, also a lot of the athletes, just by being an athlete, there's a certain level of hours and time they put in that we don't even see where, they're going to hospitals to meet kids who are sick. They're doing things for the community. It takes, I guess, a special motivation to do something that's more public. It just depends on how comfortable the individual is with going to the next step and, elevating an issue or engaging the public in something like this, something that's an important issue to them.
Yeah, absolutely. And, Andrew, my final question for you before I ask you a couple of sports questions has to do with your own personal and professional legacy and how you want that to be defined.
Well, I hope to write another couple of books. I mean, it took me 5 years to write my first novel, in part because when the first time you write a book, I think you don't know what you're doing and you're trying to figure it out. But I've got a couple ideas for other books, and I guess down the road, I'd like to be known more for my my books than my sports writing. You think about Mitch Albom, who wrote Tuesdays with Morrie. I didn't know. I mean, I probably read some of his articles in the early days of the internet from the Detroit News that he wrote for. But everybody knows him for that, that touchy-feely, the book that all our moms bought, Tuesdays with Morrie, which I think they made it into a TV movie. I couldn't write that book. I'm not quite as touchy-feely as he is in that narrative, but he's going to be known for that book forever. So, I mean, as a writer, not even about the fame, like you want to be known for something like you really put something out there that affected people that's important. I guess if you're a musician, you want to have the sort of the all-American album or the rock opera or something. I guess that's what I'm aiming for as a writer, just to kind of write something that is top quality, that is more epic than what I write in 800 words for ESPN or Forbes, and just kind of see where it goes.
Yeah, absolutely. And just finally, I'm curious. What's been keeping your interest in terms of sports and music perspective these days? And you brought up Chicago earlier about being in the intersection of great music, and I know Chicago has a great sports scene. So, what's been keeping your interest lately as it relates to sports and music?
Well, the Cubs, just started again, so I didn't really pay attention as much last year. I'm not really sure why. I think I just kind of checked out, and so they've got some young, exciting players that are pretty consistent. I mean, we're only, I don't know, 20-ish games into the season. We're just getting started here, still April baseball, but I'm looking forward, no matter what they do, to see how they compete this year. And as a Cubs fan, it's always great when the Cardinals are in last place. At least they are now, because they're going to be good in 2 months, no matter how bad they are. But one of the stories I'm dabbling with, I've got a couple ideas for a book, and one is about baseball. So I obviously need to watch more baseball just to make sure that the gears are turning. I'm plugged in. Musically, I'm all over the place, but there's a lot of good rock and roll, a lot of good indie rock coming out of Chicago, which I could bore you to death with the details of that. But it's spring, baseball's happening, summer's going to be here soon. There's going to be plenty of chances to see big concerts and small shows, both indoor and outdoor. And I live in a city where I get to do all those things, so I'm going to be pretty well occupied and happy, for the next several months.
Yeah, and just before I say goodbye to you, my friend, I'll share a quick story. So the last time I was in Chicago was the 2015 NFL draft when it was in Chicago. And so I went with my identical twin brother, and Keith and I had taken a cab to the hotel, and my brother forgot our passports in the cab, and he thought he had given them to me, and I had given them to him. So I was almost a Chicago resident, my friend, but we had a good cab driver because he came back to the hotel, and I got to go back home to Canada. So that's my Chicago story, okay?
Yeah, that happens in Chicago. I remember chasing down a cab. I can't remember if I left my phone or my wallet or something. Like, I remember I was getting dropped off at Navy Pier. I'm the person who's like, this is close enough, I'll get out here. Luckily, on the way out to get out of Navy Pier, there's a couple stop signs. I remember, like, okay, that's the cab. I need to, like, running around this, like, I don't know, this cul-de-sac or something. Finally got there, like, hit the back of the cab. I was like, hey, I left something in here. And back then I was in shape enough to kind of chase the cab down, even though it wasn't really going that fast. But yeah, that we've all left stuff in cabs. So yeah, don't do that again. But if you do, and you get stuck in Chicago forever, we'll have to make sure you get acquainted with the local cuisine. And got lots of great Mexican foods here. It's not just the Chicago style pizza. We got lots of great stuff here. So maybe it won't be so bad if you get stuck here.
Chicago's an eclectic city, and next time I'm in town, I'll look you up, my friend, and tell me if people want to get connected with you personally or buy 90 Days in the 90s. What's the best way they can do that?
Yeah, well, it's on Amazon. So if you spell the title wrong, 90 Days in the 90s, you'll find it on Amazon. It's got a bright red cover with a train on the front and a bunch of lightning bolts. So that's actually the time travel mechanism. That's what's called the gray line is on the front of the book. Or you go to 90daysin90s.com. If you're in Canada, I think you have to order through Amazon, because otherwise they'd have to fill out customs forms. It'll take forever. But anybody's in the US can go to 90daysin90s.com, and I can sign you a copy and send it. And then I also donate a dollar plus of every book to an organization called Katie's Kids. So Katie's Kids, look them up. Basically what we do is we do field trips for kids with physical disabilities. So last summer, for example, I went to a Bulls game. I got assigned to a kid, and my job was to, like, hang out with him, talk to him, get him refreshments, spoil him. We had a great time because he was super into cartoons and Marvel, but he also liked Beavis and Butthead a lot. So we recounted our favorite episodes. And this kid, I think, was like 12 years old. We also do tours of the museums. Like, some of the museums here in Chicago are huge to begin with. They're hard enough for me to get around. So if you got someone who's has difficulty walking, or they tend to be more comfortable in a wheelchair or something, Katie's Kids will do these field trips where we take them out. So I always donate money to that, and I volunteer. My son volunteers, and they're at katieskids.com if anyone wants to look up some of the cool stuff we do. But yeah, if buy my book, a piece of it will go to that. Otherwise, I'm on Twitter at Sporty Frye, Frye. That's Sporty Frye with an E. And yeah, I guess I'm on the internet otherwise.
Fantastic. Well, and as I told you at the outset of our conversation, you're joining me today on a special day for the program as we surpass 700 episodes today. So I want to thank you for taking part in the celebration of the milestone for the show, and I certainly want to thank you for the great insights you brought to the show as it relates to the intersection of sports and music. My friend, your work in the space and time on my behalf is most appreciated, and I want to thank you for being here today.
Yeah, thanks, man, for having me on. It's good to talk to you.